Welcome back, everybody. We are back with some more Fantasy Football 2023 content. Today, we are going through our top 20 quarterback rankings heading into the NFL season. Let's not waste your time. Let's hop right into these 2023 Fantasy Football quarterback rankings. Our number one quarterback should be no surprise, Jalen Hurts, the number one quarterback from last season. On a per-game basis, you're not getting better than Jalen Hurts for both a rushing and passing combination, especially in these 4-point passing touchdown leagues like the majority of people are playing in nowadays. Jalen Hurts is definitely my QB1. For me, Hurts is in a tier of his own, but in the second tier, Josh Allen's going to be the first quarterback here. Number 2 quarterback overall, has the same rushing ability as Jalen Hurts does in the red zone. A great goal line back inside the 5-yard line for the Buffalo Bills, and still has the ability to air it out. Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, now they bring in a tight end in the first round in Dalton Kincaid. A lot of weapons for Josh Allen, a lot of things to like here. That's why he's my number 2 quarterback. At number 3, same tier, Patrick Mahomes. He's my number 3 quarterback, but a lot of people expecting Mahomes to take a step back after Tyreek Hill heads out to Miami. That doesn't happen in the slightest. Goes on to win the Super Bowl against the Eagles. So I'm not worried about the wide receiver core. I think he's just fine with Kadarius Toney. Still has the best tight end in the National Football League, Travis Kelce, catching passes. And now we see year 2, Sky Moore, and they draft another wide receiver highly in this past year's draft. So still, Mahomes is going to have his weapons, just doesn't have the rushing upside like these other guys. That's why he's number 3 on this list. This is where the fun begins. My next guy, a clear tier break from these top 3 guys, Joe Burrow at number 4. Burrow might be the second best pocket passer in the NFL. Doesn't have the rushing ability of those other guys. That's why he's a tier below, like Patrick Mahomes was. But still, elite weapons, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, even Tyler Boyd at number 3. They bring over Irv Smith to be that receiving tight end. Burrow's only going to get better as he ages and develops. As he heads into year 4, this could be another huge season for Burrow, who's already been to the AFC Championship a couple times and even the Super Bowl. I'm expecting another huge year from Burrow. In 6-point passing touchdown leagues, he might be bumped up even further. But I think this is a clear tier break from those top 3 guys. I like Burrow at number 4 before some of these rushing quarterbacks like we're going to get to. In the same tier as Burrow, I'm going with Lamar Jackson. Gets that new contract, and he's got plenty of weapons this upcoming season. Rashad Bateman coming back. Hopefully he can stay healthy this year. They bring in Odell Beckham Jr. on a huge contract for what we kind of expected him to get this late in his career, but he's going to be there. Still have Mark Andrews, one of the best receiving tight ends, and they go out and draft Zay Flowers this season. J.K. Dobbins going to be back this year, should be fully healthy. There's a lot of weapons in Baltimore. They should look to lean a little bit more on that passing game with all the options they have available to them. They haven't had a great wide receiver core around Lamar up until this point. This is probably going to be the best one he's had, so I expect a lot more passing this season. But the injury concerns are definitely there. That's why I bumped him below Joe Burrow. But if you told me Lamar's going to play all 17 games, he would probably move ahead in this list. But I still got him in the same tier, just right below Joe Cool on those Bengals. My next guy is going to be Justin Fields. What an incredible season he had last year in the rushing game. I mean, one of the worst passing offenses we've seen in the NFL in a number of years. Such a low passing volume for Chicago and Fields last season, but he carried the team with his numbers rushing the football, and that's exactly what we want to see in fantasy football. That's why he's going off the board as the 5th to 7th quarterback. Kind of similar to Lamar Jackson, he gets a huge upgrade in his wide receiver core. Last season, he really didn't have anything to work with. His leading target recipient on the team was Darnell Mooney, 60 targets on the year. This season, he gets DJ Moore in the offseason. Not only that, Chase Claypool was made at the trade deadline last season and still retains Mooney and Cole Kmet. So there's a lot of weapons for Fields this season. We're going to see what he's really made of. They're not going to have nearly as low the passing volume they had last season. With Fields' ability to rush the football like we saw last year, if he could take that into this upcoming year to go along with an upgraded attack through the air, I think Fields is going to win a lot of fantasy leagues if he makes that next step in his progression. But until I see that passing volume and efficiency increase to the level of Jalen Hurts did last year, I still got to put him in this same tier below Lamar Jackson, who we've seen progress in his aerial attack throughout his seasons in the NFL. My 7th quarterback is going to be Trevor Lawrence, another young, talented quarterback. Coming into year 3, I'm hoping to see a huge leap for Lawrence and this Jaguars offense. Last season, he takes the Jaguars into the playoffs, winning the AFC South. Not only that, he also gets a win in the playoffs in comeback fashion against the Los Angeles Chargers, against Justin Herbert, a guy we'll see on this list very shortly. But Lawrence, we saw the progression last season with Christian Kirk and some of those guys on that offense. This year, year 2 with Peterson, riding that momentum that they had at the end of last season. I really like this Jaguars offense. They added Calvin Ridley, who's been out of football for almost 2 years at this point. But still, when he was healthy and right on the field, he was one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. So that upgraded to what we saw from Lawrence last year at the end of the season. I think Trevor Lawrence is on that Joe Burrow trajectory in his career. Lawrence obviously has the talent himself, and now he's got the talent around him with ETN, Calvin Ridley, and Christian Kirk on that huge contract. I really like Trevor Lawrence this season. I think he's a great value and where he's going in drafts. Same tier as Lawrence, I'm going with Justin Herbert. Herbert may have had the best start to a quarterback's career that we've ever seen. His first 3 years in the NFL, completely unbelievable numbers he's putting up in the passing game. Has a pretty significant rib injury during the season that might have hampered him and caused his numbers to dip a little bit. We are expecting a huge year from Herbert in the Chargers last season. I don't want to pin that all on him, though. He lost some guys in his receiving game. Keenan Allen missed a number of games, along with Mike Williams, who always seems to be missing games. But they add Quentin Johnson this year in the draft, a talented wide receiver from TCU. Such a deep receiving core around him. The offensive line should be a little bit better. I like to see Rashawn Slater back for Herbert. And, of course, they still have Austin Eckler. So I really like Herbert this year, just in the same tier as Lawrence. But after what I saw in the playoffs, I got to put Lawrence ahead of him in this tier. Our ninth quarterback, I'm putting Deshaun Watson for the Cleveland Browns. Pretty forgettable end to the season for Deshaun, but I don't want to hold that against him. He comes into the season not being able to work with his teammates, doesn't have a full complement of offseason programs with his guys. This season, he's acquainted with the team. He's building that chemistry with his wide receivers. I expect Watson not to get exactly where he was back in his Houston days, where he was a top 4 quarterback winning leagues in fantasy football, but I expect him to be closer to that than what we saw at the end of last year for Cleveland. Should get a good run at it in training camp this year, and he adds Elijah Moore to go along with Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and Nick Chubb still pounding it on the ground for this Cleveland offense. I think Watson has the ability to win some leagues if he gets it going like he did in Houston. Let's not forget, Watson does have some rushing ability himself. Obviously, Nick Chubb's going to garner a lot of the workload inside the red zone, but he can move the chains on third down, and I like Watson's upside given that rushing ability, and obviously he has the passing ability to go along with the compliments on the outside like we talked about. Watson, I think, is a pretty good pickup this year, given the expected improvements he'll make with this coaching staff in the offseason. Rounding out our top 10, I got to get Dak Prescott in here. I know if I didn't have Prescott in the top 10, I would hear it from a number of people, but Dak really has been underwhelming the last couple of seasons. Obviously, he's dealt with a number of injuries that have kind of slowed his progress. Not only that, he loses his number 1 target, Amari Cooper, 2 years ago when he leaves for the Cleveland Browns. But this year, the Cowboys kind of gave him some help. They bring in Brandon Cooks, who we've seen has a number of 1,000 yards receiving seasons in his past. So he has the ability to stretch the defense. And obviously, they got CeeDee Lamb across the middle, that run after the catch type player that Dak relied on the entire season since Amari Cooper has left the team. So with Cooks, Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, I expect Dak to have no excuses this season. I expect another top 10 finish Dak, even though the rushing upside has kind of faded as he's gotten older. Still, this Cowboys offense always seems to be a top unit. And with the upgrade that he's made on the outside, I got to put Dak at the number 10 spot. In my next tier, I'm going with Daniel Jones, who showed some pretty steady improvements last season. Obviously, makes it to the playoffs and gets a playoff win on the road in Minnesota, and then follows that up with a pretty abysmal performance against the Eagles in the divisional round. But Jones is providing so much rushing ability that he's kind of carrying his fantasy stats, even though he's not throwing too many touchdown passes. The yardage he's able to collect on the ground, so beneficial for his fantasy football numbers, that I got to get him right outside the top 10 as a QB1. And I expect his passing numbers actually to increase this season. They bring in a couple of guys, Jalen Hyatt in the draft. They still got guys like Shepard, Wendell Robinson, and they bring in Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders, who I will admit is at the end of his career, but he should provide some steady production at the tight end position. But I'm keeping my eye on Saquon in this contract issue. If Saquon sit out for any type of reason, I think Daniel Jones' stock does take a hit. Saquon's such a pivotal part of that offense, keeping it moving. The weapons that Jones has to go along with that rushing capability, I think he's a very sneaky player in fantasy and has been for a number of years, but now he's starting to get that recognition, and I'm all here for it. I got him at number 11 in my rankings. To round out my top 12, I got Geno Smith, a breakout year for him in Seattle last season. I expect that to continue this upcoming year. Seattle does a great job of giving him 2 tackles in the draft last year that played very well for them being their opening campaign of their careers. But Seattle gives him so much help in the draft this season. They draft the first wide receiver off the board, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who profiles to be one of the best slot wide receivers we've seen in a number of years. The wide receiver core of DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett, that's a quarterback's dream. Might be the best 3-man unit on the outside, and to go along with a great rushing attack with Kenneth Walker and now Zach Charbonnet, who they drafted in the second round. A much better receiving running back than Ken Walker is. Kind of the only hole in his game was that receiving, so Charbonnet is going to bring that to it. So he's got a lot of pass catchers on this team, and I'm not even mentioning Noah Fant, who is one of the more talented tight ends. So with all these options and his ability on the ground and move the chains. And what we saw from him last year, I really like Geno Smith. Just wrapping up my top 12 quarterbacks. At number 13, I got Tua Tagovolia. If it weren't for his injuries, he could be a top 10 quarterback this year, but he's sustained some pretty serious and scary injuries last year that had me nervous about his longevity in the National Football League. Great receiving core, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, one of the best two-man punches. Tagovailoa can stay healthy. He's going to be a great fantasy quarterback and provide some serious value where he's going in drafts. I just don't know if that's going to be the case. So it's all about health with Tua. If he stays healthy, I really like him for what he's got to work with in Miami. At 14, Kirk Cousins. You kind of know what you're going to get. He's not going to win you leagues. He's not going to lose you leagues. A very stable option in Minnesota. Just don't play him in primetime games. But seriously, Justin Jefferson, they bring in TJ Hockenson at the end of last year. Jordan Addison drafted to go along with KJ Osborne. So many options for Cousins. Not to mention a terrible defense, which should be looking for shootouts in Minnesota. I really think Cousins on this team with these options is a very stable quarterback in 2 quarterback leagues. But with no rushing upside, you can't really get too excited about him. Just a very high floor quarterback on a week-to-week basis. And it's a guy I actually am targeting 6-point passing touchdown leagues. My 15th quarterback off the board, Anthony Richardson. Some guys have him as high as number 10 in their rankings. I'm a little bit more skeptical on Richardson. I saw him a lot at Florida. The accuracy is a huge concern in my books. I know a lot of his numbers are going to come from the rushing game. I don't know how far that can carry you in your rookie season. I expect these defenses to be playing him for the run, and if he's not able to make them pay through the air to guys like Michael Pittman, I think it's going to be a serious problem for him. At the University of Florida, his completion percentage was pretty abysmal, ranking outside the top 100 in the country. So I don't know how much he can prove in just one offseason in this Indianapolis offense. That's the only reason I have him this low, because obviously in 2 to 3 years, if he can develop a consistent passing game, he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy. I think you could see him up there with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts if he's able to progress in his passing attack and get that accuracy down, which at the number 4 overall pick in the draft, the Indianapolis Colts believe he can do. I think he can do it as well. In year 1, though, I'm not ready to buy him. All right, another tier down at number 16, Jared Goff. If you're going to tell me Jared Goff played all 17 of his games in Detroit in that dome, I'd have him a lot higher on this list, but we've seen time and time again, Goff struggles on the road. That's why I got him a little bit lower in my rankings compared to some others. Not only does he struggle on the road, but he's missing Jameson Williams for the first 6 games, suspended. Doesn't have TJ Hockenson anymore, who was putting up some pretty solid numbers for the Lions in the beginning half of the year. By the end of the season, I expect Goff to be a pretty reliable player, especially when he's playing at Ford Field in Detroit. I really like Goff and some pickup spot starts, especially on bye weeks. But in a 2 QB league, numbers he showed on the road do scare me. That's why I got him a little bit lower to go along with some of the injuries and suspensions he's dealing with in Detroit. At 17, I'm going with Russell Wilson. Based off the season he had last year, you probably wouldn't even expect him to make the top 20. But I really believe in Sean Payton. I saw what he was able to do in New Orleans with Drew Brees for so many years. I think Russell Wilson, not exactly Drew Brees, but kind of similar, especially in the frame. I expect this Broncos offense to look a lot better this upcoming year. But at this point in Russell Wilson's career, I still have some concerns about him, especially with that offensive line, what they were doing at the end of the year. But with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, and some other guys coming back from injury, Javonte Williams, adding in Samaje Perine to kind of hold it down until Javonte is fully healthy. I think Russell Wilson should be a stable option, just not a league-winning player like he was years back in Seattle. Next, I got Aaron Rodgers. Might be a little low in some people's opinion, but this is a guy creeping up on age 40. The numbers last year in Green Bay weren't great. However, what he had to deal with in Green Bay, Christian Watson was his only reliable target, and he was dealing with injuries throughout the entire season. So I can't really hold that against Rodgers, who won an MVP just 2 seasons ago. Back-to-back winner right there. Gets a huge upgrade with Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Michael Carter, a lot of these guys. I expect Rodgers to have a great season this year with the Jets, relying on that defense, just not necessarily a great fantasy football season. That's why he's this low on my list. I think we have to keep Tom Brady as an outlier in fantasy and how he was able to play so well for so long. Rodgers creeping up on age 40. The rushing game is basically completely gone for him at this point in his career. So while I expect the Jets to be a much upgraded team, I don't necessarily expect the numbers in fantasy football to reflect that from the quarterback position. Right after Rodgers, how fitting is it his replacement in Green Bay, Jordan Love? I don't really know what to expect from Love, but he's a former first-round pick, so there's a lot of talent in there, and Green Bay obviously has some belief in him if they're willing to move off of Rodgers and give him the starting nod. So Love, go along with some pickups they made in the draft, new wide receiver, new tight end, go along with Christian Watson, who had a pretty great season in his rookie campaign. If he's able to stay healthy, to go along with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, I think this team is going to be a little bit better than what people expect. That's why Jordan Love's cracking into my top 20. And last on my list, at number 20, Derek Carr for the New Orleans Saints. I have some serious concerns with Carr as far as the touchdowns are going to be concerned. I want to see if Taysom Hill's still going to have that role inside the 5-yard line where they just give it to him in shotgun and just let him plow ahead for those rushing touchdowns. If that's the case, it's going to hamper Carr's ability to score fantasy points. But Carr showed some flashes with Devontae Adams. I think he's going to have even better wide receiver options this season in New Orleans with Chris Olave and hopefully Michael Thomas getting back on the field in New Orleans. Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill for this Saints team. I really like what they put around Carr. If he's able to just be a distributor in this offense, he's going to have a pretty solid year for these New Orleans Saints. That's why he's my number 20 quarterback in this year's fantasy football rankings. That's going to do it. That's 1 through 20 and their tiers for this season's upcoming top 20 quarterbacks in fantasy football. Let me know what you think of this list. I appreciate any feedback you got from me, even if you're disagreeing with it. Let me know in the comment section. I love hearing your guys' feedback. That's going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.